Stanford University.
Welcome. Welcome to Stanford Medicine's 10th Annual Contemplation by Design Summit. I'm Dr. Tia Rich, the founder and director of Contemplation by Design. We are so happy that you are here, creating our community together to engage in the interactive workshop. During this time together, Dr. Germer will be sharing with us his insights about practicing self-compassion in daily life. Dr. Chris Germer is a clinical psychologist and lecturer on psychiatry at Harvard Medical School. He co-developed the Mindful Self-Compassion program with Kristin Neff in 2010, and they wrote 2 books, the Mindful Self-Compassion Workbook and Teaching the Mindful Self-Compassion program. Mindful self-compassion has been taught to over 250,000 people worldwide. Dr. Germer is also the author of The Mindful Path to Self-Compassion. He co-edited 2 influential volumes on therapy, Mindfulness and Psychotherapy, and Wisdom and Compassion in Psychotherapy. And he maintains a small psychotherapy practice in Massachusetts. Join me in warmly welcoming Chris Germer. Thank you.
Thank you, Tia, and thanks to everyone for joining this interactive workshop from wherever you are in the world. Good evening, good morning. I got an email from somebody in Hong Kong, so I think we're circling the globe together. So yesterday's talk focused mostly on the meaning of self-compassion and the research base supporting self-compassion. So in the next hour and a half, we're going to bring our attention more to the practice of self-compassion in daily life. So in particular, I would like to explore, for each of us, personal obstacles to practicing self-compassion. I'd like to provide an overview of self-compassion practices and principles of practicing self-compassion. I'd also like to guide one self-compassion meditation and also 1 or 2 informal practices. And then we'll have a chance to explore 2 hidden, almost secret, underlying processes involved in self-compassion practice that are really important for you to know if you would like to make a go of it with self-compassion. And those 2 processes, one is the concept of backdraft, and the other is what we call the central paradox of self-compassion. And then at the end, we'll have about 15 or 20 minutes for general discussion, but hopefully we'll have some interaction as we go along as well. So there's really a lot to say about self-compassion practice. That's why Kristin Neff and I wrote a book about it. But the first rule of self-compassion practice is to become a slow learner. So I presume that learning slowly is not an established norm at Stanford. It certainly isn't at Harvard University. But as you will hear in a bit, giving ourselves permission to learn slowly actually helps self-compassion to unfold in a natural and an effortless way. In other words, not to worry, letting yourself learn slowly will actually hasten your learning, but don't try to learn everything. Okay, so toward that end, you really can allow yourself to learn slowly, because most of what I'm going to say today, you can actually read in these 2 books about the 8-week Mindful Self-Compassion course. So one is a workbook for a general audience, and the other book is for professionals who would like to teach self-compassion to others. And also, there are lots of free recorded meditations and other materials at these websites. So let's start looking at the obstacles to practice, particularly personal obstacles. So personal obstacles may overlap with the myths of self-compassion that we discussed yesterday, such as the misconception that, or myth, that self-compassion is selfish, or it's about self-pity, or self-indulgence, or that it will reduce motivation. But the personal obstacles to self-compassion are far more numerous. But I should add that obstacles to self-compassion are learned. We were not born with obstacles to self-compassion. Kids tend to be really good at self-compassion until they're told otherwise. So we were actually socialized in childhood and by our culture to think that we should not be compassionate with ourselves. Interestingly, back in 1990, the Dalai Lama, as many of you might have heard, was baffled when American meditation teachers told him that many meditation practitioners hate themselves. And he was baffled because the Tibetan Buddhist assumption is that every human being is constantly trying to be happy and free from suffering. But then almost 20 years later, in 2009, His Holiness came to Harvard Medical School, and I heard him say that people hate themselves because they think that something good will come of hating themselves. In other words, they're still trying to be happy and free from suffering, just in a perhaps unhelpful way, right? So, for example, self-criticism often makes us feel safe. It makes us feel socially safe. It even makes us feel safe within ourselves sometimes. You know, by putting ourselves down, we become small, and then we think we might stay out of trouble by that, you know, so that could become a habit. But, and our obstacles to self-compassion, almost any of them, have probably served a purpose in our lives, much like self-criticism, but may no longer be necessary, particularly not necessary when we have the resource of self-compassion. So it's really good to identify our obstacles, because simply recognizing them, being able to name them and identify them as we're practicing self-compassion, sometimes is all we need to kind of work around. So I'd like to do a very small little practice. It's called repeated questions practice. And so I'd like to ask a question, and I'd also like you then to reflect on that question. And also, if you don't mind, have a pen and paper ready so you could jot on. For you, what gets in the way of that? What gets in the way of you being more self-compassionate? And if something has come up, please, or even a few things, please write them down for yourself. It's good to remember. If you practice self-compassion more deliberately, this will come up again and again. Please write it down. And then when you're done writing, perhaps close your eyes again. And consider the question, what else gets in the way of me being more self-compassionate? And you can write down anything else that arises. And then perhaps closing your eyes one more time. Imagining, for example, that you have a little pebble and you dropped it into a well and it's going way, 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 way down. Perhaps also just allowing yourself to be open, even a little vulnerable if it feels comfortable. Knowing nobody's going to have to know what you're coming up with. But the same question, what else? What else gets in the way of you being more self-compassionate? If anything new arises for you, then also making a note for yourself. Okay, so thank you for doing that exercise. And I can tell you that, different obstacles that you may have noticed are very likely to be obstacles for you for the rest of your life. They're just going to lose their grip over time, but they're likely to arise again and again, So for me, definitely, I thought I would lose my edge. I thought maybe people wouldn't like me so much if I were self-compassionate. I also thought maybe my intellectual pursuits would lose some important edge in that way. So one, I was afraid of losing energy, and the others, I was afraid of losing acuity, mental acuity, all these things. Happy to say none of that happened. In fact, the reverse happened. But what I would like to invite people to do is to open chat. And if you're willing, knowing that whatever you write down is probably shared by, other people probably know exactly what you're talking about. If you're willing to write down one obstacle that could arise for you, it doesn't have to be the deepest, most vulnerable one. But what would get in the way of you being more self-compassionate? If you can write something in the chat, that'd be wonderful. My inner voice. Yeah, not knowing how to do it. Yeah, we feel incompetent. And frankly, we'll talk more about that a little bit later. Yeah, self-indulgence, self-judgment. Yeah. Clinging to righteous anger. Thank you for saying that. Yeah. It stops us from seeing ourselves. Time. Yeah, not wanting to pause. Yeah. The power of the pause. Yeah. Maybe it implies that I'm weak if this is what I do. Yeah. Fear of people not liking me, fear. Thank you. Internalized voice of my mother, right? Often these obstacles are internalized voices of specific people. Sometimes it's the culture in general. This is a good one. Disbelief in my own feeling, not trusting ourselves. Or the idea that perfectionism is an ideal. A lot of people who have managed to get into Stanford, you've really had to strive for perfection, haven't you? Maybe you feel it feels like this would reduce, our excellence, but the opposite's actually true. We discover people who perform really well are not so perfectionistic. Yeah, I don't love myself. That's so true, and this is so universal. Yeah. Sometimes I forget that mistakes happen. Oh, you guys, you're just wonderful. Thank you. Habit of pushing myself hard. Yeah, and that self-compassion, self-care were never modeled. It doesn't come naturally. It's not a habit. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So thank you all. Thank you all for that. And it's just really good for you to know these things, the main ones that come up for you. And as I said, they'll probably continue over time, but they will lose their grip. That's the interesting thing about self-compassion. Who we are as human beings doesn't necessarily change radically, but we learn to hold ourselves a little more lightly. We learn to not get gripped by the obstacles in our lives. So this is gold. Whatever you came up with is gold. So now I would like to start sharing some of the practices and the principles, some tips for practicing self-compassion. So number one, mental training. So most people, when they think of self-compassion, they think of mental training. They think of meditation, right? And mental training is wonderful, and it is a proven way of cultivating the resource of self-compassion. And in the 8-week mindful self-compassion training course, we have 9 meditations and 9 informal practices. So a formal practice is like what you see in this slide, people sitting. And it's like going to the gym. We sit down for a chunk of time and we actually build a new habit, a new way of thinking, a new way of, feeling. So that's formal training. It's like going to the gym. But then there's informal training, and this is what we do during daily life. This is, when we notice we're suffering, can we respond in a kind way? And yesterday, we learned the self-compassion break. That's an informal practice. And today, we're going to learn soothing and supportive touch. This is also an informal practice. So this is mental training. So what I'd like to do now is actually guide you, if you like, in the first of 3 core meditations of the Mindful Self-Compassion program, and it's called affectionate breathing. Okay? So if you're interested in doing this practice, please find a comfortable position. Maybe a posture that's, you're reasonably supported, it's reasonably upright, but no stress. In other words, this practice will take maybe 10 minutes, a little bit more. And so we'd like you to be comfortable, right? When we practice self-compassion, it makes no sense to be sitting in a way that gives us stress and pain as we invite ourselves to be comfortable, So allow your posture to reflect our intention, which is kindness toward ourselves. And if you like, you can, put a hand on some part of your body, over your heart or on your cheek or something, someplace that feels nice. As a reminder that we're bringing not only awareness to our experience, but a kind of affectionate awareness, a kind awareness. A warm awareness. So allow your hand to communicate that to your body. I'm here for you. And in this practice, we will be feeling the breath in the body. However, for some people, focusing on the breath is actually uncomfortable. There are any number of reasons for that. But if you feel that way, it's perfectly okay just to return, for example, to this sensation of touch, the hand on your body. And in fact, you can even gently move your hand back and forth, say on your chest or something, as if it were the rhythm of the breathing. You're just gently, for the next 10 minutes, kind of stroking your chest, if you like. So you don't have to focus on the breath. And also, as we feel the breath moving in the body is gently swaying. So you can actually kind of ignore the breath and just feel the gentle sway of your body, okay? And all of these practices are cultivating this quality of warmth inside the body and warmth toward ourselves. That's the whole point of this. Okay, so if all of this makes sense to you and you'd like to practice for 10 minutes, you can please allow your eyes to close partially or fully. Allowing your awareness to drop inside your body, beginning to feel the sensations inside your body. And in particular, bringing your attention to the movement of your breathing. The simple physical sensation of breathing. You don't have to meditate on breathing. We're just noticing the physical experience of having a body that breathes. And most importantly, seeing if you can notice the rhythm of your breathing. Seeing if you can notice the gentle back and forth rhythm. Just noticing the rhythm of your breath flowing in and flowing out. And if you like, even allowing yourself to be internally rocked by the rhythm. Even noticing how your physical body is actually gently swaying with every breath, back and forth. Your whole body is actually subtly moving with your breath, with the rhythm of your breathing. And if you like, you can even allow your body to just a little bit move back and forth with your breath. Your whole body gently moving with the rhythm of your breathing. Letting it be very simple. Just feeling the physical sensation of movement. Even allowing yourself to be rocked and caressed by this movement. Permission to enjoy the gentle rocking, the rhythm. And your mind will naturally wander. And when it does, just gently bring it back to the the feeling of being internally rocked by the rhythm of your breath. Just bring it back just as you might bring a little puppy back or a little child that's kind of wandered off. That's the nature of the mind, just like a puppy or a child. Very curious, that's okay. But we can bring our attention back and just feel how all the time our breath is internally rocking and caressing us. So if you find yourself watching your breath, seeing if you can let that go and just be with your breath, just feel it. If it feels comfortable to you, you can even let go of the idea of meditating and just allow yourself to be your breathing. Nothing but the sensation of breathing, the rhythm of your breathing. You can allow yourself to just be that rhythm. Nothing more. Just breathing. Nowhere to go, nothing to do, nothing to achieve. Letting go of getting it right, letting go of meditating, letting go of everything and just feeling the rhythm. Bring yourself permission to even enjoy that internal caress. Just breathing. And now beginning to release this practice. Just letting it go, knowing you could return to this rhythm anytime, day or night, formally on the cushion or in the midst of a busy life. There's always the rhythm of your breath, place of refuge in your body. So releasing the awareness of this right now and just allowing yourself to notice more generally how you feel inside your body right now. What sensations are there? What emotions are there? And just allowing whatever is there to be there, just like this. Allowing this practice to have been just as it was, no different. And if only for this one moment, allowing yourself as a human being to be in this moment just as you are, just like this. And then when you're ready, you can slowly open your eyes. So that was the first core meditation of the MSc course, Affectionate Breathing. And what's unique about it is that it's really focusing on the rhythm and allowing ourselves to be internally rocked and caressed by the rhythm of the breath. And that also then allows this quality of warmth to arise, right? In other words, by letting ourselves be held and caressed, warmth arises. And so in this way, with the breath, we're actually practicing kindness meditation. And when we do this, when we're struggling, we're actually practicing compassion. In other words, comforting ourselves through feeling the rhythm of the breath when we're under stress. So thank you for participating in that practice. Now, some of you may have had a lovely experience. Some of you may have experienced challenges, but it's so wonderful to hear what other people have experienced, even little bits of experience. If you were to think, oh, what was one thing that I experienced during that practice that was a little surprising to me or worth remembering, what would it be? And then the question is, would you be willing to share that? It would, if you would like to share in chat anything, please do. And while you're doing that, I would love to actually hear directly from somebody if you were to raise your electronic hand. We will see you and we'd love to hear from you. Okay. So it changed your physiology even a little bit, didn't it? Yeah. Excellent. Yeah. Yeah, it's important to really keep it simple. Loving kindness meditation, for example, has a lot of moving parts and it gets kind of difficult. But I wonder if you were to think of what aspect of this practice actually made a difference and allowed you to unclench your teeth and sigh, was there any aspect to it that you think did that for you? I think you're actually good at this. At least this is a way in, the rhythm and also touching your body, like not being too fancy about self-compassion, And this is a really interesting part of all the core meditations in the MSc program, and that is that actually we're not meditating, we are being meditated. Like the breath is doing the work. The breath is always doing the work. We're just giving ourselves permission to be rocked by so to give up the agency, the doer part, and just let the breath do everything and return to being rocked and caressed. It's amazing how meditation begins to bloom when we shift the doer to the practice, to the breath itself, That's the invitation. Thanks. Yeah. So you had a whole body experience, it sounds like. It wasn't just like focusing on your nose where the breath goes in or out. It was a whole body experience. And you also noticed that particular whole body experience is different than the whole body stress experience, right? Yeah. And really what we're doing, as you describe it so beautifully, is shifting physiology. The physiology of compassion is care and connection, So we just activated care and connection. We allowed the breath to hold us, to rock us, to comfort us. That goes deep and actually creates the physiology of compassion so that we can actually be with ourselves in a more loving way when things go wrong, when we have stress. Yeah. Thanks for that. Thanks for pointing that out. Yeah. Great. Okay. So now we're going to move on just a little bit. So we were just practicing mental practice, mental training, but there's also behavioral self-compassion. And so, as you can see in these images, sometimes when we're struggling, if we're going to bring compassion to ourselves, we might choose to be with someone whom we love. Maybe it's a child, maybe it's a cat, you know. And in order to practice behavioral self-compassion, there are three main questions that we could ask ourselves. And I mentioned them yesterday, but we can explore them just a little bit more now. So the three questions is, what do I need? What do I need? This is the quintessential self-compassion question. So if you're under stress, and you know, if the first thing you think of is what do I need, you've already started being self-compassionate. The train has already left the station. Simply having enough of a pause and the capacity to ask yourself, what do I need? Rather than self-criticizing, isolating, ruminating, we actually step back. We said, oh, this is hard. What do I need? You know, but often if we're overwhelmed, we can't answer that. So then it's good to break it down like you see on this slide. What do I need to feel safe? What do I need to physically soothe my body? What do I need to emotionally comfort myself? What do I need to validate myself? You know, so validating maybe means writing my journals, physically soothe myself, might mean take a bath, to emotionally comfort myself, talk to a friend. Or what do I need to protect myself? Maybe I need to say no, right? This would be self-compassion. This is more in the fierce self-compassion side of things. Maybe I need to like take better care of myself in some way. Maybe I need to motivate myself, like, you can do this. This is hard, but you want to do this. This is good for you. You can do it. So many different ways of answering the question, what do I need? But when it comes to behavioral self-compassion, we're actually really good at this already. We know how to take care of ourselves. We just don't do it when we are suffering. So we lose our self-care skills when we suffer. But if we can remember how it is that we care for ourselves, and then do that for ourselves when we're suffering, we are practicing behavioral self-compassion. So how do we care for ourselves physically? You know, get a massage, take a warm bath, cup of tea. How do we care for ourselves mentally? Maybe read an uplifting book, watch a funny movie. How do we care for ourselves emotionally? So as I go through this, please think for yourself, how do I care for myself usually? And you can even write it down, because if you write it down and then you're struggling and you look at your slip of paper and you do that, this is a breakthrough. How do I care for myself emotionally? Maybe I have a good cry. Maybe I play with a pet, listen to music. How do I care for myself relationally? You know, maybe I look at pretty photos, or I play a game, or I meet with friends, you know. How do I care for myself spiritually? Maybe I pray. Maybe I seek out people who are on the same path as I am, walk in the woods, help others. So this is behavioral self-compassion is not a lesser practice than mental training. It is not lesser practice. In fact, it's the most important practice, because, you know, we can't meditate for more than 20 minutes or 2 hours a day at max. You know, we're busy all day long. How are we relating to ourselves all day long? So it's good to understand that most of the self-compassion practice we do is actually behavioral. And then lastly, the question, how would I treat a friend in this situation? If we're wondering, what should I do for myself? How would I treat a friend? You know, would I take my friend out to eat? Would I have like a nice meal? Would I get exercise? What would I do? Can you do it for yourself? Okay. So this is behavioral self-compassion. And one of the one of the easiest and most important simple practices for self-compassion is what we call soothing and supportive touch. And that was built in a little bit into the self-compassion break yesterday. But the thing is that, you know, usually people do a hand on heart as a expression of self-compassion, like, for example, when somebody gets bad news, they go, oh my goodness, they automatically cover their hearts. This is a spontaneous compassion response. But for some people, when they put their hands on their hearts, they feel a little anxious. So then it's good to actually do a little exploration. What kind of touch can I offer myself that is genuinely comforting or soothing or supportive? So I'd like to lead you in an exploration that might help you to land on a particular form of touch that you can then carry with you out into the world. You can be on a checkout line at a grocery store and you're starting to get frustrated. You start to rub your chest, or you can get some bad news and you put your hand in your cheek and maybe even say something kind to yourself. Good to have a particular form of touch that is genuinely comforting, soothing, and supportive. So I'd like to invite you first to kind of put your hands together like this and just feel the touch of one hand on the other. And notice actually what happens when you do this. And now you might like to let one hand go to your lap and put one over your heart region and just place it there. And as you do this, always keeping kind of a inner vision, interoceptive sense. What does it feel like to put your hand over your heart? What does it feel like to put two hands over your heart? Is it a comfort? Does it feel weird? Now, sometimes when people do this, this feels like maybe too much tender compassion. Maybe I need a little tough or strong compassion. So one thing you can do is you can make a fist and you can put that over your heart like this. It's kind of got a protective aspect. Or you can put a fist over your heart, and then you can also put an open hand over your fist. And this is sort of a combination of yin and yang, of fierce and tender compassion. There's a quality of strength and there's a quality of warmth. And you can even experiment with a little pressure. You can touch your chest region even a little stronger or less strong. And what feels just right to you, Or you can leave one hand on your heart and you can put one hand on your solar plexus, the space between your rib cage and your belly. Sometimes that feels a little like swaddling ourselves, kind of holding ourselves more completely. Another option is you can take the hand off your heart and you can put it on a cheek. And you can also lean in a little bit. You can also lean in a little bit. Maybe leaning in feels different than than your head being upright. Or you can have two hands, one on each cheek. Or one on cheek and one on your head. If you have a child who has a fever, you might put your hand on your child's head. What does it feel like to have your hand on your own head and cheek? So another option is you can kind of put your hands on your opposite shoulders and you can gently rub your shoulders. Or you can let your arms go down a little bit and rub your upper arms. How does that feel, just to kind of massage your upper arms? What feels just right for you, Like right now, I can tell you this feels amazing to me. Just kind of massaging my upper arms, Or you can even stroke your arms up and down, Okay, and you can also take one hand and put it, cup it in your other and just let it drop at your weight on your lap, and just feel the calmness of one hand just being held in another. Or maybe a last thing you could do is you could put one hand on each of your thighs, and you can gently rub your thighs back and forth, And you can experiment. Maybe you rub your thighs together, forward and back, or maybe sort of, like a bicycle, one hand forward, the other back and forth, alternately. So I think you get the idea here. And what we want to do, again, is to find like one form of touch that is your go-to self-compassion touch. So whenever you're struggling, you may not be able to figure it out in your head, but if you can just give yourself that kind of touch that you need in that moment, it will, in fact, change your physiology. And research shows that. There was research done last year in Frankfurt, Germany, that showed that when people offer themselves soothing touch like this, that it reduces their cortisol level, which is a stress hormone in the body. So for the next 15 minutes, I'd like to share with you these what I described before as secrets of self-compassion practice. But before I do that, just to say that I showed this slide last time, there are many different ways to learn mental and behavioral self-compassion. You can learn it by learning mindfulness. You can take a self-compassion course. You can go to psychotherapy. You can own a dog. You can practice yoga. You can take long hikes. This is all research. The research shows that many different ways. And what seems to make the most difference is the intention for doing it. If you do this as an act of kindness for yourself repeatedly, you will, in fact, grow in self-compassion. But one really important thing to know is that when we practice, we want to be safe. So one thing that happens is this phenomenon of backdrafts. This is the first of the two secrets that you need to know. So there's a saying that love reveals everything unlike itself, or the formal definition of backdraft is the distress that arises when we give ourselves compassion. So some people wonder, when they start to practice, the only reason anybody does anything is because they want to feel better, but sometimes we feel nothing and sometimes we feel worse. And when we feel worse, we wonder, why is this? I'm obviously doing something wrong if I feel worse. And I would like to say categorically, no, this is not a measure of whether your self-compassion is working for you or not. Because when we say something to ourselves like, may I accept myself just as I am, since the mind only knows by contrast, we're inevitably going to start thinking about the opposite, like what's unacceptable about me or how I was treated unacceptably. This is backdraft. And so this is inevitable. And actually, it is how self-compassion works. It kind of stirs the pot, So the backdraft is a firefighter metaphor. And so metaphorically, you open the door of your heart, the love goes in and the pain comes out. And as it's coming out, you think, oh, something's really wrong, But actually, that's not so. It's actually revealing itself in order to be transformed. So when we're practicing, and then we start to have, curious experiences like we're starting to doubt ourselves or feel unworthy or feel like a failure, like I'm practicing self-compassion and now I'm feeling like a failure. I'm clearly doing this wrong. No, you're not. You're having backdraft. Or, I'm starting to love myself just as I am, and poof, I'm just overwhelmed by shame, right? Well, this is because these are the obstacles to backdraft, to self-compassion that are arising, or grief. This is when our hearts started to shut down because we didn't get the love that we need. And where it's now revealing itself. Sometimes it reveals itself in the body, in body memories, aches and pains. Sometimes behaviorally, we just get agitated and we want to run, So this is, one of our participants once said, it seems like kaboom, but it's really kabloom. We can actually reparent ourselves with self-compassion because we give ourselves kindness, the old wounds come up, and then knowing that this is backdraft, we bring kindness to ourselves in a safe way. This is a secret, and this is really important if you would like to grow in self-compassion. We need to assume that this will happen and respond to it with kindness. So how do we respond? Well, in many different ways. The most important thing is to be able to say, oh, I think this is backdraft. In other words, not to get too, obsessed about it. Oh, this is backdraft. And then back off a little if you're doing mental training. Back off a little from the training, maybe do a little less. Or shift your focus a little bit. Maybe focus a little bit more on like what exactly is the emotion that's arising? Where exactly in the body is this emotion arising? And then giving yourself some soothing and supportive touch to that part of your body, right? So take really good care of yourself when backdraft comes. Give yourself the love that you need, or just the patience that you need. Backdraft usually dissipates over time. When it's coming out, it's usually leaving. And by giving ourselves kindness, we actually allow that pain to leave us, right? But as I was starting to point out before, we really need to practice what's called safety first. And so there are three, zones of tolerance or zones of experience that we can be in when we're practicing self-compassion. We could feel safe, and feeling safe means, comfortable, calm, warm, content, relaxed muscles, slow pulse. Or we could feel challenged. That means like energetic, curious, focused, alert, motivated. Or we could get overwhelmed, right? And overwhelmed means flooded with emotion. So sometimes self-compassion can open up old trauma. And then we could get flooded, and that's not helpful. So if we ever notice that we're in the overwhelmed zone, whatever you're doing, stop it, because you cannot learn in the overwhelmed zone. You just cannot learn. This is when we're flooded with our emotion, when we have self-doubt, when we're tense, when we're confused, when we can't sleep, if we have racing thoughts, we're afraid, distracted, exhausted, this kind of thing. So if you ever notice you're starting to get into the overwhelmed zone because of self-compassion, back off. You remember I said you want to be a slow learner? Slow learner means you don't push yourself into the overwhelmed zone. Slow learner means walk slowly, go further. Okay? So, and all this mind training is actually reprocessing trauma, but sometimes we need to know when to back off, okay? And the best way to back off is to stop the mental training and go to behavioral training, like, all these things we're talking about, taking a warm bath and so forth. So if you ever have, get into the overwhelm zone, if you have a lot of backdraft, then stop what you're doing and just be super kind to yourself. So ultimately, I might have scared some folks with backdraft, but ultimately self-compassion is really safe because it is ultimately about behavioral self-compassion, and that is compassion which is very, very ordinary. Anchor your self-compassion practice in gardening. Anchor your self-compassion practice in walking the dog. And then you will be able to grow very naturally and easy in self-compassion. Okay? So there's that. And one thing you can do if you get overwhelmed, this is really effective, is take a walk and focus on the soles of your feet. Feel the changing sensations in the soles of your feet. And the way this works is your attention is then the furthest point on your body from your head. Your head is where all the problems are coming from. Your feet, your feet are not overwhelmed. Just feel the sensations in the soles of your feet. and just keep walking until your body settles down. This is one of the most powerful ways of working with the overwhelmed state, whether or not it comes from self-compassion practice or just in life. Soles of the feet. There's also a nice research on this that shows that it very quickly helps us to regulate our emotions. Okay, so in the last 10 minutes or so, I would like to describe the second secret. And the second secret is basically this central paradox. And that is, when we suffer, we practice not to feel better, but because we feel bad. If you remember this, your self-compassion practice will go swimmingly. But you will probably forget this in 5 minutes, because everybody forgets this in 5 minutes. Another way of saying it is, when we suffer, we practice not to perfect ourselves, but to perfect our love. Or when we suffer, we practice not to perfect ourselves, but rather to embrace our imperfections. So what does this mean? So this really refers to the third stage of progress in self-compassion practice. So we go through these stages for sure. And it's really good for you to know this if you're going to practice self-compassion. So everybody begins wishing to feel better, right? That's completely natural. That's called striving. And sometimes when we're doing that, we even have an epiphany like, oh my goodness, self-compassion feels so good. I can tell you, my 83-year-old mother, when I started learning self-compassion, she asked me what I was doing, and she asked me what she could do to learn self-compassion, and I told her. And then a couple of years later, I asked her, I said, did you ever do this, Mom? She said, oh, yes. I said, anything interesting? She said, yeah. She said, I never knew I could love myself. 83-year-old woman, I never knew. Like, nobody told her, right? So what sometimes happens is, when we discover self-compassion, we have kind of an epiphany. It's a little bit like falling in love. It's an infatuation. It's like, I can love myself. This changes everything. So then we get in kind of a rush. It's like a drug state. Like infatuation. But like all infatuations, it eventually ends, right? So you might recall, when you were in love for the first time or the second time, that at some point almost nothing happens and it's over. The infatuation phase is over. Maybe real love begins, but maybe you're at dinner and something's hanging out of your beloved's nose, and you're like, oh, it's kind of like a person, and then we discover, oh yeah, this is a person, not just the answer to all my dreams. That's called the disillusionment phase. And when we practice self-compassion, exactly the same thing happens. Sooner or later, we get disillusioned and we think, actually, I'm not very good at this. Other people are good at this. I'm not good at this. I can't do this because I'm too damaged from childhood, or I've got just the wrong habits, or I'm just no good at this. We sometimes can get stuck in the disillusionment phase and quit self-compassion practice. In the same way, we can get stuck in backdraft, not knowing what backdraft is, not knowing how to work with it, and give up this self-compassion practice. But disillusionment phase is actually progress. And it's progress because at this point, we can actually begin to change or refine the intention behind our practice. So in the striving phase, we're actually trying to manipulate how we feel and change who we are, which is fundamentally a kind of subtle form of aggression against ourselves. And it is the seed of failure in almost any kind of self-improvement process. But with self-compassion, when we recognize that we're in the disillusionment phase. In other words, I actually feel kind of like I always felt, and I'm kind of like the person I always was. Ooh, I'm not very good at this. It's a little bit like, looking over the dinner table and saying, oh, this person I thought was, fabulous as a human. Well, so am I. Whoa, this isn't working. Now what to do, So what happens is a refinement of intention. The disillusionment phase is actually what we call the gift of desperation, or a moment of creative hopelessness. It's actually when what we were doing, which is striving to change ourselves or our experience, has failed. And this is progress because we have mileage behind us. And in that broken state, we can remember this, the central paradox. When we suffer, we practice not to feel better, but simply because we feel bad. And this means loving ourselves up just because we feel bad. Sort of like you'd love up a child with the flu, You're not trying to hack the flu by being kind to your child. The flu is going to take 5 days, 6 days. You're just loving the child because the child is all right. So all of us have the flu, and it's a lifelong flu, and it's called human suffering. So here's the question. Now we're getting really to the heart of the matter of what is self-compassion, how to practice self-compassion. Here's the deal. When we suffer, do we instinctively, try to activate some self-improvement strategy? Do we say, okay, now I'm going to throw self-compassion at this and this is going to fix it? Well, I assure you, if you do, over time, it will not work. But what would it be like if instead you just loved yourself because you were suffering? In other words, if you just allowed yourself to be fully human. So what Kristin Neff and I like to say is that the goal of self-compassion practice is to become a compassionate mess. To become a compassionate, this is the goal, to become a compassionate mess. And this is fundamentally not different than we are. It means human. It means we're often struggling, we're, uncertain, we often feel incompetent, us. This is us. This is humanity. This is our humanness. But rather than trying to push it away and basically getting in a fight with ourselves, which is otherwise called stress, this is like what stress is. What would it be like if we allowed our hearts to melt, or we gave ourselves kind support in that moment simply because we're suffering, right? So so we're not inviting people to become a mess. We're already a mess. We're inviting ourselves to put the whole self-improvement agenda on a new footing, which is to be a compassionate mess, to love ourselves up when we suffer just as we are. And when we do that, then self-compassion blooms inside of us and it will transform our lives. So this is the invitation of self-compassion, and particularly self-compassion practice. The invitation is to be present with what is with great compassion. Okay? So that's the most important thing I wanted to say. Tomorrow morning, we will be learning the third of 3 core meditations in the Mindful Self-Compassion program, giving and receiving compassion. This is especially good if you're a parent or you're caring for somebody, how to be present with suffering, but also in a self-compassionate way, which doesn't diminish the other or diminish ourselves. So now I think we have time for, open forum, 20 minutes to discuss whatever is on your mind about this rather Interesting, for me anyway. Hope for you, some interesting, interesting phenomenon in practice. Thank you so much for your attention. And how shall we do this, Tia?
Thank you, Chris. I'll share one question that was put in the chat to me directly, and that is a segue from what you just referenced for tomorrow's practice, especially being relevant for those of us who offer care to another individual. And the individual wrote asking about the resources that you referenced yesterday for caregivers of individuals with dementia.
Yeah, so thank you for that. So that protocol and study is just now beginning by a colleague, Michael Ferguson, here at Harvard Medical School. So you're going to have to wait for a few years on that. However, you will learn a really great practice tomorrow on how to be with people we're caring for that are frustrating us, that are making us angry, that are even making us hate ourselves because we are starting to hate the people we're supposed to be caring about, or we're just too exhausted to think about it, So caregiving can be really, really tough. And as we've learned more than ever over the pandemic is that it can lead to burnout. It can lead to burnout because of the conditions of caregiving, or it can lead to burnout because we care so much, but we're not caring for ourselves. So really one of the most targeted antidotes to compassion fatigue and burnout is self-compassion. And it can be easily integrated into anybody's life. And that's what I'd like to describe and do together tomorrow. And if I may say, Kristin Neff and I, this week are wrapping up writing a manuscript called Self-Compassion for Burnout. So we've particularly taken the entire self-compassion course and we have adapted it to the experience of burnout, and particularly including compassion fatigue. Yeah.
Thank you for that. Often people talk about the preventive benefits of self-compassion practice, and from what you just referenced, there appears to be insight and opportunity to embrace dis-ease or burnout or other states of hollowed out bodies, minds, and spirits. Could you say a little bit more about how to nurture the intention to be kind while feeling depleted, to kind to oneself?
Yeah. Well, so I can just give you a taste of tomorrow, and that is compassion is not enough, Just like yesterday, we were saying when we want to decide what to do, compassion is not enough. We need wisdom to tell us what to do. When we're dealing with burnout and compassion fatigue, compassion is not enough. We need equanimity. We need equanimity. And equanimity is just a fabulous word. It's captured in the Alcoholics Anonymous equanimity prayer. It basically is a way of disentangling ourselves emotionally from what's going on, not detaching ourselves, but disentangling ourselves so that we can see clearly and the heart can open. We have in the MSc program a so-called equanimity phrase, which we particularly suggest for caregiving. And this is what it is. It goes like this. I am not the cause. Everyone is on their own life journey. That's the first line. Everyone is on their own life journey. Now, as I say this, think of somebody who you're caring about who might be stressing you out. Everyone is on their own life journey. Even your children, but that's a little hard to wrap your head around perhaps first. Everyone is on their own life journey. I am not the cause of this person's suffering. I am not the cause. Isn't that true? I am not the cause of this person's suffering, nor is it in my power to take it away, no matter how much I wish I could. I can't remove it. No matter how much I wish I could, I want to remove it. This is what causes me so much pain, and I can't remove it. I'm not the cause of this person's suffering, nor is it in my power to take it away, no matter how much I wish I could. Caregiving, particularly stressful moments like this, when we're in it, are difficult to bear. This is hard on my heart. Yet, I may still try to help to the extent that I can. In other words, not try to do more than I can. I cannot take it away. And I also can't, drive myself into the ground over this. So everyone is they're on their own life journey. I'm not the cause of this person's suffering, nor is it in my power to take it away, no matter how much I wish I could. Caregiving can be very difficult to bear, yet I may still try to the extent that I can. This is a balm. So what self-compassion does is it allows us to be kind to ourselves. But when we add equanimity, we often get the space, like we get the space in order to be kind to ourselves. When we offer ourselves this equanimity phrase, we actually disentangle in a way enough to begin to be kind to ourselves, enough that we can warm up our own internal landscape, which then inevitably changes our perception of the person we're caring for. When we're disentangled and we're no longer frightened, fearing, or self-loathing, but rather feeling warm toward ourselves, that warmth eventually envelops the other person we're with, but from a new perspective. And this is the power of self-compassion plus equanimity. And how we do that in the midst of caregiving is what we'll learn tomorrow.
Thank you. Very tangible pathway forward. A question has come in that builds upon this theme. When one finds oneself in the position of providing care to someone who in a prior time was the cause of trauma for yourself, can you speak to how to hold that circumstance and the individual references boundaries and having self-compassionate boundaries?
Yeah, well, I wish I could speak directly with that person. So that's a tricky one, and it requires more self-compassion. It's not just caregiving, for a challenging person, because we have to actually care even more for ourselves in the midst of caregiving. And that includes, we need to be able to do fierce compassion. We need to protect our hearts. We need to protect our time. We need to protect ourselves, perhaps as we have not been protected by this person we are now caring for, So just a lot of respect for that kind of situation. And to know that fierce compassion is often what's called for in a situation like that, in addition to tender compassion. But when we have been harmed, the first thing we need to be able to say to the harm that happened, and to the parts to the inner voices that are continuing to harm us, we need to be able to say, no, not now, not me, and like we have to be able to say no to the internal threats, including the ones that are trying to get us to go beyond our capacity. And we also have to say no to someone who might actually be continuing to harm us. So fierce compassion is a very important part of caregiving in this situation. But just more compassion, self-compassion is needed. Yeah. Yeah, a
Thank
lot of
you.
respect, a lot of respect for that situation. And whoever it is that said that, you need to know you're not alone, not alone.
And do your books offer the script for some of the fierce compassion focused meditation practices and behavioral practices?
Yeah, so Kristin Neff just wrote a whole book on it. It's called Fierce Self-Compassion. And so I would strongly recommend for those people for whom self-compassion resonates, go out and get her book. It's kind of a tool kit book. It has lots of actual practices that we can do in order to activate the energy of fierce, protective, providing, and motivating compassion. Yeah.
Thank you. There is some content coming in. And it says advice for the negative self-chat, please.
For the negative self-talk, self-chat. Yeah. 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 In the MSc program, we have a whole module on self-criticism. Historically, people have thought that when self-criticism occurs, that we need to just kind of stamp it out, or just go to town against it. But basically, what we resist persists. So if we fight negative self-talk, it just gets stronger. I think just about everybody has had that experience who's tried to do it. So that doesn't work. To say not now is different than fighting. That's a boundary. It's not an attack. But a lot of negative self-talk is really, as I mentioned earlier, a safety strategy that actually there's a kind of implicit effort. Often we've internalized negative voices, but those negative voices have also tried to keep us safe, like a parent who said all kinds of things to us in order to keep us safe, and we internalize them, but they're kind of harsh, So a lot of self-criticism, negative self-talk actually had some effort in there, positive effort. This is not always the case. Sometimes we have just internalized toxic influences in our lives, and then a simple no, 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 is necessary. But if you can sense that behind the self-criticism was some, misguided but, positive motivation to keep me safe in some way, then we can engage that part of ourselves. We can engage the inner critic, and even, invite the inner critic to put down its burden, because it's not easy for the inner critic to put down its burden, and then to allow us to achieve the same goal in a new way. And literally what that means is to begin to cultivate a positive, a compassionate inner voice, to exchange. What we're doing is exchanging. We're not trying to crush the critical voice. We're exchanging the critical voice for a compassionate voice. And in a nutshell, what it means is we begin to talk to ourselves as we would talk to a loved one, or as we would wish someone who's full of compassion and kindness and strength and wisdom were to talk to us. So this is something we can learn. We can actually learn to cultivate a compassionate inner voice in exchange for the critical voice. And what happens then is the critical voice actually loses its motivation. It just doesn't, it feels relieved it's off the case, because now we're safe in a new way. So that's, in a nutshell, kind of how that works.
Thank you for that skillful illumination of the transition from the protector voice from self-compassion rather than self-criticism.
Yeah.
And in that trajectory of insight, could we apply a little more understanding to this question? How can we overcome ways of being that bring us self-esteem through external validation, but do not support self-compassion because they are actually detrimental? Basically, how can we try to say no to external factors that previously have brought us self-esteem and that are socially validating, but not actually supportive to our well-being?
Yeah. That effort withers away once we have cultivated self-compassion. Just like the self-critic withers away, also our hankering for external validation withers away as the energy and the resource of self-compassion grows in us. Basically, as we learn to love ourselves, we just don't care so much what other people think.
Thank you. We're nourished enough from that internal connection.
Yes, exactly. We're feeling the love. We're feeling filled with love, and so we're not as needy. We're not feeling, diminished, devalued. We're not hungry, We can. Here's the deal. So much in our lives we're reaching out in order to get something. We want to get validation. We want to be seen. We want to be heard. We want to be supported. We're so often we have unmet needs that we are reaching out to other people to supply for us. But the hand that is reaching out and almost grabbing others, saying, please, please give this to me. This same hand we can like do a U-turn and we can love ourselves up. Most people just don't know this because they haven't heard this, like my mom at 83 years old, or because there's like cultural, prescriptions against it. But we can love ourselves. A lot of the love that we are seeking, a lot of the, social approval and approbation that we're seeking, we can give that to ourselves. We just need to begin to do that. And when the heart is full, the need begins to dissipate. It'll never go away completely. We need to be in connection with others. We're social beings, but we don't have to spend our lives hungry for that which people cannot give us.
And speaking to observation earlier about the benefit of practice in community, what would you say regarding this nurturing of the transition from the external sort of buttresses that hold one up to the internal architecture that holds one up, and the role of practice in community in building that transition?
Well, I can give a practical tip. The Center for Mindful Self-Compassion, every day, sometimes 2 or 3 times a day, in all different time zones, have free practice groups for people who would like to learn self-compassion in community. The best way to learn self-compassion, even though it's called self-compassion, is actually in community. The best way to learn it is in community. And so where is community? You can get online through the Center for MSC.org, and you can join for free communities which have been going on for 2 or 3 years now, and people are just over the moon about this. So it's available, and it's really helpful to learn self-compassion in community. When people are basically encouraging us to be kind to ourselves, that kind of like frees the grip of kind of conventional norms that don't know anything about self-compassion. It frees that grip and allows us, it gives us permission to begin to take care of ourselves as we have always needed. So there is community out there.
Thank you. And thank you for laying out the framework that you provided today and for offering a guided practice tomorrow. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you. Thank you all. Just so happy to have had this opportunity to explore this together. Yeah.